Continuing with our VFX series, let's try to make something like this, a procedural non-destructive explosion. How ironic, non-destructive in a way that we can procedurally change the explosion. So yeah, this is what I'm managing to do. You can see we have some smoke. I think I should have toned down the smoke a bit so that you can see the underlying explosion, but you can see we have a few miniature explosions within the explosion itself. Boom, 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 and yeah. If you want to check out the project files, links are going to be in the description. We're going to need a building, so let me go to my asset library and just search for a building. Let me use something simple like this. It has some nice details. One thing I want to do is first make sure that my windows are separated, because I want to fracture those a bit differently. So I'm going to come in here and select those and hit P to make sure they're on a different layer. I'm going to have them in a different collection. Let me disable that for now. And let's start by fracturing this. So I'm going to come in here, apply the mirror, give this a particle system. The end frame is set to 1, lifetime is about 250, and add an explosion modifier. So I'm going to hit cut to cut the edges as well. And now we get those chunks. These chunks are too big for my liking. But before we do that, let me go to the physics and just turn off gravity for now. I can go back to the properties and explode, turn on size. Now I can go back to the particles and make sure this is set to 1. And if I bring this down a bit, I can see the different chunks, and I don't need to see those points. I can just turn them off just like that. And I need this to reset. So I can see my chunks, but I want more chunks. So I'm going to subdivide this mesh using a subdivision surface and make sure this is set to simple and above the particle system. And in the particle system, I want this to have in the source, use modifiers so that I can use the modifiers. The size of your chunks is going to depend on the subdivisions you have in your mesh. So this mesh is not well subdivided. So I'm going to add a few extra subdivisions. I think that's good enough. I also want some thickness, so I'll add a solidify modifier with some thickness. Yeah, make sure you have even thickness turned off. I think that gives us a better subdivision. So this is just to give us some thickness to the walls. I think this is good enough. I'm going to go back to the particle system and just remove the points. Now, if you hit play, we get that. But we want to make sure that the mesh stays intact and the pieces don't move anywhere. So I'm going to come here, turn off the normal, and you can see now when we play, all the pieces stay in their original position. Now I want to start adding damage to different areas like you see here. Now what I can do, I can come in here and let's say I have an icosphere just like this, and it's going to cause the explosion. So I'm going to animate it, hitting there and then going all the way there. Just some nice animation like that. And I'm going to use dynamic paint. This is going to be our canvas, and we want to paint. The format is going to be an image sequence. You'll see why I'm using image sequence, and paint. Let's see. Yeah. And the output, you can select any output you want. Then you need to make sure that your mesh is foil UV. So let me make sure that is the case. A quick way to UV unwrap this, you can just use light map projection, just like that. Think that's good. After UV unwrapping, we need to set up a brush. So I'll select this as our brush, dynamic paint, type brush, add canvas. Its source is supposed to be mesh plus proximity, and I think that's it. Now we can go back to this and bake. This will create a contact mask for where this mesh contacts this canvas, and we can preview that by just going to the sequence, and you can see that we have something there. I can also come here and I'm just going to split this window so that I can have the shader editor, and I just import that image. I just search for image sequence and navigate to this path, or you just copy it directly and then go back here, texture, image sequence, paste that there, and it should take you to that. Select all the images, import. Now turn on auto refresh, and if we click on this, hit play, we can see how this is painting our mesh, which is nice. Now, why are we doing this? If I come back here, let's continue previewing this. I can go to the particle system and scroll down to textures, set up a new texture, go into that texture, and make sure I'm using the same paint textured image we have just baked. And if I go to the mapping, change the coordinates to UV so that we're using the same UV map we created. We can map this image to the particles, and we can influence the gravity. Now if I hit play, gravity, oh yeah, you need to set gravity back up, and make sure that in the influence you also have it on. So if you hit play, you can see that the area that, if we preview this, you will see that the area that is within our mask is also being affected, but we need to make sure that this is auto refreshed, and we have all the frames. Now you can see that where we paint, the particles that get that paint also get affected by gravity. Let me come here and just increase my particle count to something like 3000 so that we have more particles. And I'm also going to come in here and just make sure that this is properly subdivided. Yeah, you can see now we want to have a lot of squares, uneven distribution of faces. It will help quite a lot. So especially for the faces that the camera is going to look at. You don't want a large face like this. Yeah, I think that's good. Now if we bring back our subdivision, another thing we could do is go back to the particle system, but I want this to be a little bit smaller. So I'm just going to scale it down in edit mode. Any changes you make on the brush, you have to come back to the dynamic paint and rebake this. So I'll just bake this again. And when you bake, also make sure to reload the images because they are not reloaded automatically. I'll select the node, Alt R to reload images. And you should also do that in the textures tab. I just hit the refresh there and you should refresh. Now you can see we have that. Now the textures are still there and everything is still there. Now another thing we could do is under the influence in the textures, we can turn on physics. We can have this affect the physics, and if we go back here to the particle system, under physics you can turn on rotation and just increase the angular rotation, turn on dynamic, randomize, I think it is, let me see. Yeah, you can randomize this. Actually, you can randomize everything here. And we should have some bit of rotation in this. I don't like that this is just falling down. So what I can do, I can come in here and add a force field, just like this. And let me make sure this is transparent so we can see through it, see our force, and parent this force to the object, Control P. Now, because our force has no fall off, everything is being blown away, but we can give this force a fall off. So I can come here and give this a fall off, nearly the size of our sphere. Yeah, so I can give this larger strength. So we can come back to the influence and a texture. Make sure you have force field turned on as well. And now you can see that we're starting to see some pieces being shot out like that. So I'm going to come here, use gravitation, and let's amplify this force just to see how much influence this has, if it has any influence at all. Okay, so for the force to work, I just make sure you have force field turned on and physics turned on as well in the influence of the texture. And on the force, make sure you play around with the maximum distance for the fall off. And now you can see that the force is actually pushing. Yeah, so we can use this to push these pieces out like that. I'm just going to add a flow and just use collision. Particles should be sticky, damp, and have some friction. So If you want this to feel like a force, so we just have to increase the velocity here. So I should just hit it really fast. And again, like I said, when you change this brush, the animation of the brush, you have to come back and bake the texture. And when you bake the texture, you need to come back to the texture and reload it everywhere you have it. Okay, so now you can see we have a nice Presidio explosion, just like that. Now the great thing about this is I can even just building up a bit. Let me edit it just a bit. So we have some, just duplicate this. Okay, we'll just add a few subdivisions here. Ctrl L, and just duplicate this. Shift D. But now we have just added a new part of the mesh. So we need to unwrap this again. Let's use the light map. I think I need to apply scale for this light map. Now you can pack these UVs to make sure that you're optimizing the UV space. Good. And since we have changed the UV, that means our texture has also changed. It won't work very well. So we need to bake this again. So I come to dynamic paint and bake again. Okay, when you bake again, you need to reload the images here. Perfect. Now you can see that even our flow now gets properly damaged. I can even come in here and add more rooms. So select this face, Shift D, and just make some interior walls. Yeah. Again, since we have added more mesh detail, we need to unwrap this again, pack UVs, bake again, and reload. Yeah, you can see the interior walls are damaged. So are the exterior walls, which is great. On top of this, you can apply some geometry nodes. I can give these a different material. So for example, I can give these a new material. Let me call this just a very bright red. Solidify. I can go to the materials and give the rim that material. So if I play back, yeah, you can see now, yeah, the rim area have that material. So if I add geometry nodes on top of this, so if I go under geometry nodes and add that, so if I come here into geometry nodes, I can use material selection, and I think I call that 1, 3 something, and use a separate geometry. Just use this selection. I want to separate faces, so I've separated the interior. So I can do a lot of things here. I can make this more detailed, give it some noise. I would have to subdivide this, subdivide mesh, and set position, use a normal, connect that to the offset, and use a vector math, scale it down, and use a noise texture as the scale this down a bit. And if we join this back to the original geometry, so with a join, we basically make these a bit detailed, but you can see they're separated from the original mesh. There are a lot of ways to avoid that. You can use edge neighbors to select the outer faces. So if the face count, if we use a compare node and the face count is greater than 1, we can use that as the selection for this. Let's see if that would work here. And see my FPS has really gone down. Yeah, you can see I've managed to displace just actually I need to scale this. I guess we could give this a set material, but of type concrete or wall, whatever. Again, this is going to be determined by how powerful your machine is. Let's try a large scale like 30. Yeah, you can see now we have some extra detail. You can add extra detail like that quite easily, or even skip that part for this tutorial. So we have that. Your explosion pattern is going to be determined by how this is animated. So I can just reanimate this to make like small explosion. So I can just have this start the explosion somewhere there. Just scale this up. You have to bake since we changed the animation. So bam, bam, just like that. We still have the windows, so I can bring those back. So the windows are not breaking because they don't have the same effect as we have. So the first thing we're going to do is give this a particle system, just like that. End frame should be 1. Lifetime should be the length of the timeline, so 250. Should have rotation, dynamic, angular, velocity. And in the physics, let's see, nothing there. Gravity should be on, and then create a new texture. It's going to use mapping of UV. And the UV map, again, we need to have a different UV map for the explosion so that we don't mess up the UVs for the textures. So I'll do this and call this XP for explosions, and then I can unwrap this as I want. It won't affect the textures because the textures are using a different UV map. Now I can come back here in the textures and set up a new texture. Make sure the mapping is using UV and it's using the SP UV map like that. And we need to set up dynamic paint. This is going to be our canvas, basically our second canvas, and we should be painting, an image sequence just like that. And we can make sure you create a different folder from the last one. So I'll just create this and call this 2 so that I don't accidentally overwrite. Okay, this would be, let's call it 3 so that I don't overwrite the ones for the walls. Let's see what else. I think that's it. We already have the brush. Okay, so I can go to that path, just paste it back here. Okay, make sure you have auto refresh. If we preview this, we can see the painting. Make sure it's the same folder 3. Select everything, import, refresh, auto refresh. And for the influence, again, this is going to be affect the gravity, force field, and physics. You don't need to see those dots. So under render, I'll just disable them. After that, make sure you have the explode. Now you can see that the windows are also exploding, just like that. I think we need more subdivisions. So I'm going to add a subdivision surface, making sure it's simple and it's above this. 2 subdivisions, and now everything shutters as expected. The windows also break, just like that. And now the last thing we can do is add a small simulation. So I'm going to add a domain, which is just a cube that encloses our simulation. Go to the physics, fluids, domain, gas. I'll use 64 for preview. What else? I want the bottom to be an obstacle or collision. Adaptive domain, so we can simulate faster. What else? We can add some noise. We need a source of the smoke. So right now, if we play back, nothing is going to happen. But if we select the building and give it a fluid, flow, smoke, instead of geometry for the behavior, we can use inflow, and in the source, leave it at mesh. If we hit play, we should see that the entire building starts emitting smoke, but that's not what we want. We want just the pieces or the chunks to give off smoke like I had in the original version. To do that, we're going to need another dynamic paint canvas. So I'm going to set up a new one. This time the format is going to be vertex, and we want to paint our weight paint, and the brush is already set up, our original brush. Now, for now, let me first disable this domain. Let's set it to none. And let's see if this is actually painting. I'll make sure you set up the vertex group. So I'll hit this to add it. Now I can go to the vertex to weight paint, and you can already see that we are painting some vertex paint. So we have that and that. That is what the smoke is going to be emitted from. So I can come back to this. Let me collapse this fluid, smoke, and the mesh. There is an option for vertex group, so I'll just select that, DP weight, that is what the dynamic paint is painting on. And if I hit play, now if I need to bring this back to the domain, make sure that I have the same settings I had before. Yeah, you can see now the smoke is being emitted from same particles. You can see even the ones that are jumping out are emitting smoke. And actually I need to raise the resolution to 64 for you to see how this is looking. So you can see even these chunks are emitting smoke. I think this is a good way to fracture things. This, yeah, can collapse. It's collapsing correctly as I expected. Look at that. Yeah, a nice way to create a destroyed building. You should bake faster when you have the smoke disabled. Now the windows are updated, everything's updated. Yeah, and for the smoke or for the dust, you can see my setup. I just have the density really up, the anisotropy about -0.5, and that's my setting for the color.